Palestinian political violence refers to acts of violence or terror motivated by Palestinian nationalism. Common political objectives include self-determination in and sovereignty over Palestine, the liberation of Palestine, and recognition of a Palestinian state, either in place of both Israel and the Palestinian territories, or solely in the Palestinian territories. More limited goals include the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israel and to achieve a Palestinian right of return. Personal grievances, trauma, or revenge against Israel are widely maintained to form an important element in motivating attacks against Israelis. Palestinian groups that have been involved in politically motivated violence include the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Abu Nadal Organization, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hamas. The PLO officially renounced terrorism in 1988, and Fatah says it no longer engages in terrorism, although the authority continues to provide stipends to the families of Palestinians killed or arrested by Israel through the Palestinian Authority Martyrs Fund, payouts that according to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs take up 7% of the authority's national budget. Palestinian political violence has targeted Israelis, Palestinians, Lebanese, Jordanians, Egyptians, Americans and citizens of other countries. Attacks have taken place both within Israel and the Palestinian territories as well as internationally and have been directed at both military and civilian targets. Israeli statistics state that 3,500 Israelis have been killed and 25,000 have been wounded as a result of Palestinian violence since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. These figures include soldiers as well as civilians, including those killed in exchanges of gunfire. Israeli statistics listing hostile terrorist attacks also include incidents in which stones are thrown. Suicide bombings constituted just 0.5% of Palestinian attacks against Israelis in the first 2 years of the Al-Aqsa Intifada, though this percentage accounted for half of the Israelis killed in that period. Tactics have included hostage-taking, plane hijackings, stone throwing, stabbing, shootings, and bombings. Several of these groups are considered terrorist organizations by the United States government, Canada, and the European Union. In protest against the Balfour Declaration, which proposed Palestine as a homeland for the Jewish people, and its implementation under a League of Nations mandate for Great Britain, Palestinians, both Muslim and Christian, from November 1918 onwards, began to organize in opposition to Zionism. By the end of Ottoman rule, the Jewish population of Palestine was 56,000, or 1/6 of the population. Hostility to Jewish immigration led to incidents such as the riots of April 1920, the Jaffa riots of 1921, the 1929 Palestine riots, until a general Arab revolt broke out for 3 years, in 1936 to 1939, which was crushed, with the loss of 5,000 lives, by the British Army. After the passing of the United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine in 1947, which called for the establishment of independent Arab and Jewish states, a Palestinian civil war broke out. On the declaration of the State of Israel, the 15th of May 1948, a full-scale war, involving also the intervention of neighboring Arab states, took place, with casualties of 6,000 Israelis and, according to the 1958 survey by Arif al-Arif, 13,000 Palestinians, and the exodus, through expulsion, or panicked flight, of approximately 700,000 Arab Palestinians who subsequently became refugees. In the Six-Day War, a further 280,000 to 360,000 Palestinians became refugees, and the remaining Palestinian territories were also occupied from Jordan and from Egypt, and later began to be settled by Jewish and Israeli settlers, while the Palestinians were placed under military administration. While historically, Palestinian militancy was fragmented into several groups, the PLO led, and eventually united, most factions, while conducting military campaigns that varied from airplane hijackings, militant operations and civil protest. In 1987, A mass revolt of predominantly civil resistance, called the First Intifada, exploded, leading to the Madrid Conference of 1991, and subsequently to the Oslo I Accord, which produced an interim understanding allowing a new Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian National Authority, to exercise limited autonomy in 3% of the West Bank, and parts of the Gaza Strip not used are earmarked for Israeli settlement. Frustration over the perceived failure of the peace talks to yield a Palestinian state led to the outbreak of the Al-Aqsa Intifada in September 2000, which ended in 2005, coincident with the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. The rise of Hamas, the use of Palestinian rocketry and Israel's control of Gaza's borders, has led to further chronic violence, culminating in a further two conflicts. The Gaza